I will never vote for one of those Chuck Schumer goons, okay? So give me Graham Platner with all of his mistakes and all of his faults, and you go dig mainstream media, bunch of hacks. Schumer gives you the info, you're like, oh, I'll type it up, okay. He's a bad guy, outsider, for change, a populist, bad guy, okay? I got it, I've been through this 1,000 times. Come on, Anna, we've been through it 1,000,000 times.
Yeah, we have been through it 1,000,000 times, Cenk. Always, we put our whole support, we overlook all of the red flags, put all our support behind the progressive. He's the progressive. Okay, red flag, ignore it. Red flag, ignore it, ignore it, ignore it. He's gonna save us, he's gonna save us. Oh, are we now discussing?
I don't need him to save us. I need him to win this race rather than Susan Collins or Janet Mills, who swear that they will represent every other corporation and foreign government, but never the citizen.
I'm not saying don't vote for someone. I'm saying don't ignore the red flags. And more importantly, how does the left not see this? Maybe they don't see it because they didn't go through what I went through. But how do you ruin someone's life? How does Majority Report do 5 videos on me saying I don't like calling women birthing people? And that's worthy of full cancellation. You are irredeemable. You are a TERF. You are a transphobe. You are garbage, right? How does that happen? But suddenly we find ourselves in a situation where the very same people are defending a guy who got a freaking Nazi tattoo, and he claimed he didn't know it was a Nazi symbol when he got it. Okay, even if I took that for face value, he was drunk, he was in the Marines, he didn't know it was a Nazi symbol, he got it. Then he keeps it on his body and doesn't cover it up for 20 years?
I think that proves the opposite.
So last week we did a video, which I encourage you to go watch, covering a Democrat by the name of Graham Platner. That is the Maine Senate candidate endorsed by Bernie Sanders, who was coming under fire at the time for a series of leaked Reddit posts, which, keep in mind, were not that old. We're talking about just 2021 here, where he had self-identified as a communist who said he was keeping his guns around because he didn't trust the fascists, right? So just insane, typical, radical, revolutionary, violent leftists, and further made comments like all cops were bastards. He further said rural white Americans were stupid, low IQ, and ignorant, which is a greatly ironic thing to say when you're running for Senate in the state of Maine. But very interestingly, outside of us and a couple of other creators and maybe a 30-second segment on the news, you didn't really see a lot of coverage of this story from the national media, which is very interesting. After all, I think it should be a shocking scandal, frankly, that a self-identified communist is running for any major political office in America. But of course, we know who are writing the rules of this society. That said, this week he is now coming under national media scandal because other leaked images from his past are revealing that he has a skull tattoo on his chest that critics are noting closely resembles the skull symbol of the Nazi Waffen SS, which you can't even make that up. I mean, isn't that ironic, right? That the people constantly calling us fascists and Nazis and saying that that mere accusation, anything that might resemble them whatsoever, is the worst thing that should disqualify you from American politics and public life. Of course, their hero is apparently running for office with a alleged SS tattoo. And there's a lot to be said about this story, right? On one hand, you have the irony and, of course, the fact that I do believe this guy should be treated by the same moral standards that the left has applied to everyone else, right? He doesn't magically get a free pass. If this were a Republican with that tattoo, it would be career ending. It would be the biggest scandal ever. And yet you see a lot of prominent Democrats, including Bernie Sanders himself, simply making excuses for that. At the same time, I have to say, there is a very broken moral standard in our politics that this is a bigger scandal than the Reddit posts, right? Because again, you're kind of reaching a bit. You're saying, look, that looks like the same skull. Maybe it was a Nazi tattoo. He got it 20 years ago versus 4 years ago. He just said to the world he was a violent communist and nobody cared because being identified as a violent communist is apparently not even scandalous to the moral standards of our politics, but apparently this one is. So, that goes both ways, but we will tell you the full story on this tattoo in today's video and just show you more of the imploding campaign of Graham Platner, because it turns out this guy is running for office with a lot of skeletons, quite literally, in his closet. So we'll get into it, guys. First, though, do us a favor. If you enjoy our content, make sure you hit that like button down below and subscribe to the channel if you are new. That is not only the best way to support our work, but it also ensures that you can stay up to date with all of the latest news and coverage. And that said, let us briefly recap, right, some of these comments. Saying, and I quote, "I got older and became a communist." Another one said, "I'm a vegetable growing psychedelic taking socialist these days. Still got the guns though. I don't trust the fascists to act politely." And apparently, again, according to the Democrats and basically everyone, that was not a big deal. But this one is. So, Democrat Maine Senate candidate, according to the New York Post, Graham Platner admits he got this Nazi-linked tattoo while very inebriated. Here you go. So, about 20 years ago, saying he was not a secret Nazi, but he did get this tattoo, again, that resembles the SS symbol, while on leave in Croatia. The liberal candidate, by the way, he's not a liberal candidate. He's a far left communist candidate, according to his own words, right? I'm not making that up. I'm not putting that in his mouth. He said he got older and became a communist. It was not a very long time ago. It was 2021, right? So that's, again, I'm going to keep raising this point. 20 years ago, he gets this tattoo. And, maybe he meant it for Nazi intentions, maybe not. How is that not a bigger scandal? How is the smaller scandal the fact that 4 years ago he said he was a communist? We'll get into that more. I don't want to get ahead of myself, but here are just those details. Went out of his way to disclose the controversial skull tattoo on the right side of his chest as he shared an embarrassing video that showed him basically singing in only his briefs at a wedding celebration for his mother. And that is what this, of course, looks like. Apparently, he did this as an attempt to get ahead of the bad press, said he was on leave with fellow Marines in Croatia in 2007 when he got the questionable tattoo, which appears to resemble the Totenkopf, the image adopted as a symbol by Hitler's Schutzstaffel or SS. We got very inebriated, saying here, and we did what Marines do, and we decided to get a tattoo, he explained on the Pod Save America show. And apparently, according to him, the justification is, we chose a terrifying looking skull and crossbones off the wall. Keep in mind, they were in Croatia here because we were Marines, and skull and crossbones is a pretty standard military thing. And we got those tattoos and we all moved on with our lives. Well, again, that explanation might actually be valid if it was not for the fact that you guys have crafted this moral standard where everything is Nazi, everything is Hitler. So if you're going to get an actual symbol from the SS, yes, you are accountable for that. And yes, according to you guys, you should never be allowed to touch politics and you should basically have your life ruined. I'm not saying that. That's the moral standard we've created, right? We've seen how they treated Elon Musk and many others. We constantly have to deal with these allegations on a daily basis when we are not Nazis and do not have tattoos of the Waffen-SS. So, hey, little Heinrich Himmler here, buddy, no, you can't just run from this, okay? He says, and I quote, "I'm not a secret Nazi," the Bernie Sanders-backed candidate insisted, claiming he was unaware that the tattoo had potentially sickening connections to Nazism. Well, again, I say, how did you not know? And you know what? Even if you didn't know, you're still a Nazi. Right? You can never escape that allegation. Nazi! Everyone chant right now. Nazi, Nazi. There you go, right? He said the tattoo never raised any red flags, including when he joined the Army National Guard. The Army does prohibit ink that is extremist, but no one thought anything of it. Well, again, we can retroactively declare things to be extremist. After all, that's the way we treat the founding fathers and stuff. We say they were bad people because they don't apply to our current moral standards. So there you go. We just invented these moral standards in 2025 and they're being applied to you, buddy. What do you want from us? I didn't write the rules, But of course, he goes on, and we'll show you in a second what he's saying about all of this. But just for context, again, you saw the tattoo in that earlier picture. This is that skull symbol, the Totenkopf, adopted by the SS. And take a listen here. This is apparently his excuse for it as he apologizes for all of his crazy, insane past.
That I've been going around with something like that utterly horrifies me. I know that symbols like this can be incredibly damaging to people, and the idea that I've had it all these years and it could have been read like that is incredibly troubling. I have lived a life dedicated to anti-fascism, anti-racism, and anti-Nazism. I think that racism and anti-Semitism are a long scourge on our society and a long scourge on our politics. And I think it has no place in our world. For that reason, I have gone and gotten it covered up. Last night, I went to a tattoo parlor and I got this to cover up the skull and crossbones. It's a Celtic knot with some imagery around dogs because my wife Amy and I have two wonderful dogs that we love a lot. This far more represents who I am now than even the skull and crossbones did, which I thought that it was. This has come up because the establishment is trying to throw everything it can at me. It is terrified of what we are trying to build here. Every second we spend talking about a tattoo I got in the Marine Corps is a second we don't talk about Medicare for all.
Well, buddy, whose fault is that? Who decided to be on the left? Who decided to, in their own words, dedicate their whole life to fighting for anti-fascism, anti-racism, all of these different things? Which, according to the leftists, you know, the way they apply that term does indeed mean, yeah, I mean, you should be catastrophically canceled for having something like that tattoo. And by the way, you replaced it with, what'd you say? A Celtic knot? So you're saying you still replaced it with something white from European history? What is that supposed to mean, huh? Are you making a white supremacist dog whistle? Is that supposed to represent a Valhalla or Hyperboreans? I think he's still a white nationalist. I don't know. I'm just going to say that. It seems like that to me. You don't say, you know? And again, guys, I say that under normal circumstances, if I were writing the rules of society, right, and this guy were not like literally a communist as well, I would say, yeah, like I can fully believe that story. It's 20 years ago. It's just a tattoo. It's not going to harm anyone. No big deal. But no. We cannot apply his moral standards, our moral standards to him because we're not the ones in charge of those moral standards. So there you go, buddy. Nazi. Anyways, very interestingly, even his former campaign director, someone who knew him, is disputing this claim as well, saying, quote, maybe he didn't know when he got it, but he got it years ago, and he should have covered it up because he knows damn well what it means, wrote Genevieve McDonald on Facebook. According to the outlet, she had resigned from Platner's campaign after his old Reddit post that we talked about earlier surfaced, while labeling all police bastards, describing rural white Americans as actually stupid and racist, and once calling himself a communist around 2021. And that is also a very legitimate question. You know, if you've done your entire life, like, you know, talking about anti-racism and fascism and all this stuff, how'd you not know in the whole course of this 20 years that until now that was the SS symbol? You know, I don't know, just some interesting things to raise. Now, again, here is my fundamental problem with this scandal. Is while yes, on one hand, like two things can be true at the same time. I think on one hand, yes, he does deserve to be treated by the moral standards of his political coalition, and we are going to apply those, right? We're not going to magically excuse leftists when they get kind of hit by their own boomerang. No, that's their fault. They're the ones who threw the boomerang to begin with, right? At the same time, I do have to say, I think something is fundamentally broken about the moral norms of our politics when that tattoo that might have been intended as a Nazi symbol, might have not. It probably, honestly, if we're being honest, was not meant to be that. It's just like he didn't know what he was doing. He was an idiot. Is seen as a bigger scandal than 4 years ago. Not being coy about it, not like, oh, he got some vaguely communist symbol tattooed. No, he just said he was a communist, and the communist one is not the bigger scandal, right? That represents warped moral norms of our politics. And why is that? Because we're taught in school, basically, and the entire kind of structure of our society has been based on this very fundamental premise that, like, the fascists and the Nazis were the only bad guys of history, and therefore something vaguely resembling the SS symbol is actually seen as worse in our society 20 years ago than calling yourself a communist 4 years ago. And why does that moral standard exist? Well, it's actually very simple. Because our school system and our cultural norms and beliefs and all those things ultimately were crafted by communists. They're crafted for and to defend and protect the communists. That's why, for instance, the only thing basically that kids are ever taught in school, and if you ask the average American, the only one they'll all know about is Hitler and the Nazis, right? I guarantee you ask the average American who was Vladimir Lenin, only about maybe 50 to 75, like liberally estimating, would be able to answer there. And That is a fundamentally broken system. But why is that? It's because when people get older and they're able to approach politics, they have this worldview that, again, Nazis, which they associate with the far right, were the only bad things to ever exist. Therefore, do not pay attention to the far left. As the far left grows and increases in society, remember, they're always the eternal good guys simply because Antifa, anti-fascist action once upon a time as one example, and the Soviet Union, by the way, were against the Nazis, therefore it is good. But that is not reflective of actual history, right? Here are some objective facts of history, as I listed right here, that if they were simply taught to school kids, we'd actually have a better society crafted on, first of all, a real understanding of history, not a selective one-sided thing, and secondly, would actually have better moral norms that made more sense. Fact number one, communism killed way more people in history than Nazism or fascism ever did. That is a simple fact. Okay, that is something that cannot be disputed. People can talk about genocide denial all they want. That is genocide denial, to pretend like communism did not kill over 100 million people in the 20th century alone. Fact number one. Fact number two, even when it comes to World War II history, which is like taught way more in our popular culture and school system than the Cold War or World War I or other such genocides or all these things, right? Even in the context of World War II, Nazis are far from exclusive in being brutal, atrocious mass murderers, okay? You can talk, for instance, again, about the Soviet Union themselves. There's a strong argument to be made and a lot to be talked about in regards to the way they treated both prisoners of war and civilian populations, both in terms of the lands they conquered and even their own domestic citizens, okay? There's, serious argument could be made. I'm not going to make it. But you could say that Stalin was a fundamentally more evil man than Hitler, right? But that's not the way it's taught. It's like there was only one bad guy. No, there were more than one bad guy. Secondly, even outside of that debate alone, the Empire of Japan, again, as an objective fact of history, committed countless atrocities. Actually, you can research it for yourself, okay? The way they treated both civilian populations that they conquered, rape of Nanking as one example, the Manila Massacre as another, and, the way they actually treated their prisoners. You want to talk about Joseph Mengele? Unit 731 in Japan, compare that, right? Frankly, a lot of the Mengele stories from the Holocaust would basically be a completely normal day in a Japanese prison camp, right? That's how bad it was. And yet notice that never gets talked about, right? And then at the same time, for whatever reason, Germany's had to spend the past 100 years or so apologizing for it. Japan, nothing, right? No one ever, actually, as a fact of history, the vast majority of their war criminals were never even put on trial. They never got a Nuremberg style thing, and they absolutely should have, right? And why do I bring all of this up? It is to point out, as I put here, that the current moral norms of our politics, which are crafted to suit the left, would not exist if actual history were taught to school kids. And it's funny, I'm sure someone's going to come and accuse that of being Holocaust denial or something like that. I'm actually not denying it, right? Absolutely believe that Allied troops, for instance, liberated Dachau and saw exactly what they saw. What I'm pointing out, right, is that because you did not have that moment, say with the Soviet gulags, or even with a lot of the Japanese prison camps, but part of that also has to do with Cold War politics and the US trying to reinvent Japan as an ally. A lot of these equal horrors and atrocities are not taught about. Why is that? Because if you taught about Soviet atrocities properly in the same light as Nazi atrocities, while again, they actually killed more people, you would realize, the quote-unquote far right are not the only bad people. Look at the far left. Actually, maybe we should be even more scared of the far left than we are of the far right. But they don't want people to think that. Similarly with the Japanese thing, I would argue that, it further fits the narrative that, like the evil Europeans, white colonizers, only bad guys of history. Yeah, you still learn something, right? And again, at the end of all of that, what's the conclusion here? If they taught it that way, and if we had an honest conversation about the world and world history, the strategy of constantly calling everybody a Nazi who they disagree with, which is applied basically exclusively to the right wing, wouldn't work so well. Because in response, we could say, well, you're a communist. And that would have the equal weight, which it should, as being called a Nazi. Just something to consider there, right? So that's why I, again, say that to me, the disqualifying aspect of him in this race should be the Reddit posts and not the tattoo, right? It should be seen as morally reprehensible. It should be seen as totally discrediting. Force anyone to run for public office having called themselves a communist, especially just about 4 years ago. But by the way, when you go deep into the Democrat Party, he's far from alone, right? Karen Bass, as another example, the mayor of LA, she was part of a Maoist communist revolutionary group back when she was in college, took some trips to Cuba. You know, Bernie Sanders, honeymoon in the Soviet Union, all this stuff is seen as okay, right? It's not really a big deal, not a big problem. But it should be, right? If you cannot run for office having called yourself a Nazi, you shouldn't be able to run as a communist either. But again, that would assume that the moral standards of our society were not constructed by communists, which they are, right? Let's not forget the J. Jones scandal, by the way. Very similar. But again, according to the national media, some young Republican group chat where they said an obvious joke about gas chambers or something like that. That's worse than the actual political candidate of a top position in the 2025 elections talking about murdering Republican children, and it didn't come off at all as a joke, right? Same reason, by the way. Why? And again, this is an example of why the moral standard, while I have that take on the way it should be, no, the existing moral standard that they've created should be applied here. Never forget, by the way, what they did to Pete Hegseth, who has a tattoo on his body, not of a Nazi Waffen SS pagan symbol, but of the cross of Jerusalem, right? It is a Christian symbol. It's a cross, obviously. They said this was a Nazi tattoo, which is just not, right? It's just not at all. American flag, cross of Jerusalem. I'm assuming that's the insignia of armed forces or something like that. Versus this, no, absolutely. We're not going to be forgiving that treatment at all whatsoever. And yet, what are you seeing? Progressives like Bernie Sanders to this very day, I know this is going to surprise everyone. Guess what they're doing? They're defending Graham Platner. Because, of course, moral standards only go in one direction, which is why we should just disregard them. That's why I say, again, we should just throw out the moral standards of this society created by communists, right? I'm only going to apply them selectively on them because that's what they create. I totally disregard it, right? I will happily say, no, the Reddit posts are worse than the tattoo. But that said, you're talking about the same Bernie Sanders who attacked Pete Hegseth for a Jerusalem tattoo. He calls Trump a fascist. Yet what does he have to say about the SS tattoo? Take a listen for yourself.
I'm not overly impressed by a squad of media running around saying, what do you think about the tattoo on Graham Platner's chest? Between you and me, there might be one or two more important issues. But let me go there. I'm not Graham's best friend. I met him several times. We did a rally in Portland, Maine, a great rally. I am impressed by it.
Wait, there's one or two more important issues, Bernie? What could possibly be more important than Nazism? I thought that's the biggest thing in the world, and I thought that's what you guys are so fearful of a takeover for. So, no, actually, according to you, it's the biggest deal in the world.
He will acknowledge, I'm not telling you what he doesn't say, he had PTSD. He went to the VA. He went into a dark period in his life. I suspect that Graham Platner is not the only American to have gone through a dark period. But what he did was he expressed his darkness on the internet. Probably not a brilliant thing to do, all right? And he said things that are stupid, things that were hurtful. He has apologized for them. And what he says now, and the guy that I saw up on the stage in Portland, Maine, rather a brilliant guy. I mean, really a strong fighter for the working class, very articulate, very smart.
Oh, really, Bernie Sanders? He apologized for what he said as soon as he started a political campaign, not before that. And according to you, that's a valid excuse, right? That should be taken at face value. Okay. So should the people from the Young Republicans group chat, which you guys made a national scandal over, if they apologize, is that fine? Do they get to just move on from it? Or have you guys spent a very targeted campaign trying to ruin their lives and their professional careers completely? But again, you said if they just apologize, it's okay. So again, according to your moral standards, you say the guy had PTSD. And you say, he has bad things in his past. Folks, the Reddit posts are 4 years old. They're not that old. Meanwhile, the Young Republicans, right? Some 20-year-olds who are not actually in politics. They're basically in a glorified social club that sometimes does works with political campaigns. But we're not talking about candidates for office. We're not talking about actual serious operatives. You guys ran that as the biggest story in the entire country. But they didn't mean it. They had some dark thoughts. Hey, how do you know they weren't going through their own mental health problems, Bernie Sanders? Huh? It's just so ridiculous, Crystal ball too, by the way. Check out this tweet right here saying, for me personally, I'll take a candidate with a regrettable tattoo over one who has steadfastly supported a genocide. Yeah. Oh. Well, hopefully, if anything, this scandal demonstrates to the rest of us and to all the conservatives and Republicans out there why we should not spend any time, again, appeasing the moral standards of communists, right? Why we shouldn't, frankly, really care what they have to say about us in any regard, because you can see it yourself. Just look at how dishonest they are, right? Let that just show you. Yeah, don't take these people seriously. Don't take the names they call you seriously, because they're not even serious about them, right? So there you go. Again, communists running for office with a Nazi tattoo. That's the Democrat Party for you. But anyways, with that said, guys, let me know your thoughts on this in the comment section down below. Be sure to leave a like on this video, subscribe to the channel if you are new, and until next time, God bless and peace.